Chapter 1. Acquisition. The auction room at Harwick Estate smelled of lemon polish and old money. Malcolm Reed adjusted his Italian silk tie, feeling the weight of disdained glances from his peers. 3 years ago, they would have nodded respectfully. Now, they barely acknowledged him. The piece sat alone in the corner, draped in purple velvet. Malcolm approached it, while the other bidders clustered around a collection of Renaissance bronzes. Something about its isolation drew him, one forgotten object recognizing another. When he pulled away the cloth, his breath caught. The mirror stood nearly 7 feet tall, its silver surface flawless despite obvious age. But it was the frame that truly commanded attention. Dark walnut, carved with figures in various stages of ecstasy and agony, their bodies twisting together in impossible configurations. A naked woman arched her back in pleasure while beside her. A man's face, contorted in what could be either orgasm or death. Malcolm swore the man's expression shifted slightly as he changed position. "Remarkable," he whispered, running his fingers along the polished edge. Not for sensitive collectors, this one. The voice belonged to Harwick's curator, a thin woman with spectacles who appeared at his elbow. "Late 17th century, Hungarian aristocracy. The Bathory collection, supposedly." Malcolm's pulse quickened. The Bathory name would add considerable value. "3 other bidders examined it this morning," she continued. All withdrew their interest. Curious. Malcolm leaned closer, studying his reflection. The silver surface seemed unusually deep, as though extending beyond the physical constraints of the frame. His image looked better somehow. The circles beneath his eyes, less pronounced, his skin tone more vibrant. A trick of the light, certainly. "Is beautiful? Yes, but not for keeping in bedroom." The heavily accented voice came from behind. Malcolm turned to face an elderly man with skin like crumpled parchment. The seller, based on his badge. "Why not? It's exquisite." The old man's roomy eyes narrowed. "Baron Sandor keep in his chamber. His wife die screaming. His children too. All Sandor family die looking at own face." He tapped his temple. "Mirror shows what you want, then takes what it wants." Malcolm smiled tightly. "I'm sure it does, mister?" "Kovacs! Thank Kovacs!" The old man pressed something into Malcolm's palm, a small paper packet. "Salt blessed by priest. You win mirror, you put this in water, you wash glass every week." "How thoughtful," Malcolm said, pocketing the packet while mentally calculating how much the Bathory provenance might be worth to private collectors in Dubai or Shanghai. As Kovacs shuffled away, Malcolm's thoughts drifted to the disastrous Caravaggio authentication that had destroyed his reputation. The painting he'd certified as genuine for £8 million, later proven a clever fake. The collectors who'd blacklisted him. The gallery he'd been forced to sell. The wife who decided his downward spiral wasn't part of her 5-year plan.
His phone buzzed with a text from his bank. Final warning about the penthouse mortgage payment. The auctioneer called for attention. Malcolm took a numbered paddle and settled into a chair, watching as lesser items were sold. When the mirror came up, he was surprised to see only one other bidder, a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses who dropped out after Malcolm's first counter-offer. "Sold to number 23 for £6,000, the auctioneer announced, sounding almost relieved. 6,000. Malcolm had budgeted 50. He glanced back at the mirror, wondering what flaw he'd missed. The silver surface caught the light, and for a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw a smile on his reflection that didn't match his own expression. The mirror dominated his penthouse study, positioned between 2 windows to catch the morning light. Malcolm had dismissed the moving crew after they'd scratched his hardwood floors. Preferring to make the final adjustments himself, the mirror was surprisingly light for its size, as though hollowed out within. He spent the evening organizing his reference library and drinking Macallan 18 while admiring his acquisition. In proper lighting, the craftsmanship was even more impressive. The carved figures seemed almost alive, their wooden bodies flowing into one another in a continuous circuit of pleasure and pain. To new beginnings, he toasted his reflection, which looked better than it had in years. Even his gray hairs seemed to have retreated. The Macallan tasted unusually vibrant on his tongue, each sip flooding his senses with intensity he hadn't experienced since his 20s. He fell asleep in his chair around midnight, reference books about Hungarian aristocracy open on his lap. The digital clock on his desk read 3:17 a.m. when he opened his eyes. He was standing before the mirror, his nose inches from the silver surface, hands pressed flat against the glass. His breath fogged the surface in rhythmic clouds. Malcolm jerked backward, heart hammering. He had no memory of getting up, of crossing the room. His fingertips tingled where they'd touched the glass, a pleasant electric sensation pulsing up his arms. Sleepwalking, he muttered. Christ. As he turned to go back to his bedroom, something caught his eye, a faint glow coming from behind the mirror. He carefully tilted the heavy frame forward, using his phone's flashlight to examine the wooden backing. Intricate symbols had been carved into the wood, then filled with some silvery metal that caught the light. They formed concentric circles around a central figure that looked like a woman composed entirely of reflective shards. The craftsmanship was as precise as any watch mechanism. Malcolm traced one symbol with his finger. The metal was warm to the touch. "What are you?" he whispered. In the silver surface, his reflection smiled back at him, whiter than felt natural on his actual face. Chapter 2. Reflection. Malcolm woke to insistent knocking. Sunlight streamed through the study windows, revealing him sprawled in his leather chair, still dressed in yesterday's clothes. His mouth tasted like ash, but his mind felt unusually sharp. The knocking continued, harder now. "I'm coming!" he shouted, wincing at the volume of his own voice. He caught sight of himself in the mirror as he stood. Despite his rumpled state, his reflection looked remarkably well rested. The chronic redness around his eyes had faded. His skin appeared smoother, almost luminous. The knocking became pounding. When he opened the door, Vanessa stood there in a cream cashmere coat, lips pinched with annoyance. "I texted 3 times. Did you forget I was coming for the Klee Prince?" Her voice had the practiced neutrality of someone determined to maintain composure around an ex-spouse. "Sorry, working late." Malcolm stepped aside to let her in. Vanessa moved through the apartment with the confidence of someone who had chosen every piece of furniture, selected every paint color. She headed directly for the study, her heels clicking precisely on the hardwood. She stopped at the threshold, body tensing visibly. "When did you get that?" Her voice had changed, a tremor undermining her usual confidence. "The mirror? Last week. Hungarian, possibly connected to the Bathory family." Vanessa didn't approach it. She stood rigidly, her reflection visible from where Malcolm stood, pale, diminished somehow compared to her actual presence. "I don't like it." Her voice was uncharacteristically small. "You don't have to. You don't live here anymore." Malcolm regretted the words instantly, but they weren't entirely his. They felt pushed from somewhere deeper, colder. "The prints are in the cabinet." He gestured toward the far wall. Vanessa moved sideways toward the cabinet, never turning her back on the mirror. As she gathered the artwork, her reflection remained oddly still, head cocked at an angle her actual body hadn't assumed. "Are you feeling all right, Malcolm?" she asked suddenly. "You look different." "Never better," he replied, surprised to find he meant it. As she left, clutching the prints to her chest, she paused at the door. "That thing, it doesn't feel right. Be careful." Malcolm closed the door behind her, irritated by her concern after all she'd taken from him. He returned to the study, drawn to the mirror's silver surface. In its reflection, The apartment looked more opulent than in reality, richer colors, deeper textures. Even the morning light seemed more golden, more substantive. He touched his face, tracing the contours that had sharpened overnight. Objectively, he looked better, as though aging had reversed by several years. But how? He'd slept maybe 4 hours in a chair. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. In the kitchen, he cracked eggs into a pan, inhaling as they sizzled. The smell hit him like a physical force, sulfur and protein and fat, each component distinct and mouth-watering. When he took the first bite, flavor exploded across his tongue with unprecedented intensity. The butter was a symphony of grassy notes and creamy richness. The pepper, a complex array of heat and earthiness he'd never fully appreciated before. He consumed everything ravenously, sensations heightened to an almost painful degree. His phone buzzed. Eliza, his assistant, reminding him of appointments he'd completely forgotten. The gallery was closed, his reputation in tatters. But he still consulted occasionally, small authentication jobs from clients who valued his expertise enough to overlook the Caravaggio disaster. 3 hours later, he returned home after a meeting with a minor collector interested in a dubious Degas. The entire time he'd been out, anxiety had gnawed at his insides, a persistent unease he couldn't explain. He'd rushed through the consultation, making excuses about another appointment. The relief of walking back into his apartment was instantaneous, like stepping out of crushing depths into air. He went directly to the study, standing before the mirror. His reflection grinned back at him, the tension visibly draining from his shoulders. The doorbell rang, startling him. Eliza stood in the hallway, slim and efficient in her perpetual black clothing, carrying a stack of folders. "You left these at Mr. Harrington's. He was quite concerned about your abrupt departure." Malcolm ushered her in, taking the folders. "Sorry, stomach issue, couldn't be helped." Eliza's eyes widened as she looked at him properly. "Are you on some new regimen? You look incredible." Malcolm smiled, feeling a flash of warmth at her appraisal. "Just sleeping better." "Well, whatever it is, keep doing it." She followed him into the study, stopping when she saw the mirror. "That's new. Hungarian, 17th century. Possibly earlier." Eliza approached it cautiously. Her reflection appeared oddly diminished, the colors of her clothing duller, while Malcolm's reflection remained vibrant beside her. "It's beautiful craftsmanship, but—" She shivered slightly. "It's a bit much for the space, don't you think? Those carvings are rather explicit." Malcolm hadn't noticed before how the carved figures engaged in increasingly depraved acts toward the frame's bottom corners, acts of violation and ecstasy rendered with disturbing anatomical precision. "I find it fascinating," he said, voice lower than he'd intended. Eliza stepped away from the mirror, visibly uncomfortable. "I uploaded those Hungarian research materials you requested, the files in your email." After she left, Malcolm opened his laptop. True to her word, Eliza had compiled an impressive archive of information about Hungarian nobility of the period, focusing on the Bathory region. He began reading at dusk, absorbed in accounts of Elizabeth Bathory's notorious blood rituals, allegedly performed to maintain her youth and beauty. The mirror wasn't mentioned specifically, but several inventories listed reflective devices for ritual purposes among her possessions. More interesting were the documents referencing an alchemist in her employ, György Thurzo, who specialized in creating objects that gathered and concentrated vital essences. One passage described his technique of incorporating human materials into his creations, though the text delicately avoided specifics. Malcolm's eyes grew heavy as the light faded from the room. He should turn on a lamp, but his limbs felt leaden. Just a moment's rest, he thought. He jerked awake, disoriented. The room was pitch black except for his laptop's glow. The screen showed documents he didn't remember opening, detailed translations of Hungarian texts, meticulously annotated in his own handwriting. The clock read 3:17 a.m. Again. Pages of notes sat beside his laptop. Analysis of symbolism in the mirror's carving. Connections to ancient fertility cults that predated Hungarian settlement. And references to the Lady of the Glass, a deity or spirit mentioned in regional folklore. Malcolm stared at the pages, handwriting unmistakably his, but the content foreign. He couldn't remember writing any of it. He looked up at the mirror, now reflecting only his laptop's blue glow. Had he imagined a woman's silhouette within the glass, quickly retreating as his gaze found it? Sleep came fitfully when he finally dragged himself to bed. His dreams were a montage of flesh and silver, naked bodies writhing in pleasure that transformed into agony, masked figures performing rituals around a pool of quicksilver, a woman with glass for skin embracing him intimately as her sharp edges opened his flesh. He woke gasping, erect and horrified in equal measure. The next days established a pattern. During daylight, Malcolm worked with unprecedented focus, researching the mirror's history while fielding a surprising number of requests for consultations. Word was spreading about his rejuvenated appearance and the new confidence in his authentications. Nights, however, belonged to the mirror. He would work until exhaustion, then wake at his desk hours later with no memory of the intervening time, but pages of notes in his handwriting, advancing his research at an impossible pace. One evening, alone in the silence of his study, he heard it, a whisper from the mirror's direction, like paper sliding against paper. He looked up, seeing nothing unusual in the reflective surface. "Hello?" he called, feeling foolish. Silence. Then again, a sound like distant voices conversing in a language he couldn't quite identify. Hungarian, perhaps, but older somehow. He approached the mirror, pressing his ear to the cool surface. The whispers intensified, tantalizing in their near comprehensibility. One voice emerged clearer than the others, feminine, seductive, speaking directly to him. "Just the pipes," he said aloud, stepping back. "Old building." But the whispers returned each night, gradually resolving into distinct words he could almost understand. They spoke most clearly at 3:17 a.m., when he invariably found himself standing before the mirror with no memory of leaving his bed. His research yielded disturbing discoveries. The mirror's creation coincided with a series of disappearances in the Hungarian village where the Bathory family maintained an estate. 17 young women vanished over 3 months, all described as beautiful, all from families skilled in silverwork or glassmaking. More disturbing were the reports that followed the mirror's completion. Those who gazed into it too long reported seeing their most secret desires enacted within its depths. Some became obsessed, refusing to leave its presence. Others reported whispers and visions. 3 owners before the Baron had died by their own hand, faces flayed by mirror shards. Malcolm found these accounts simultaneously troubling and thrilling. The mirror was more significant than he'd realized, not merely valuable for its provenance, but potentially historically important as an artifact of folklore and superstition. He was running late for a promising authentication job, a potential Clint sketch that could restore his reputation completely if verified. Yet as he dressed, anxiety bloomed in his chest. He kept returning to the study, checking his reflection before attempting to leave again. Each time he neared the front door, the pressure in his chest intensified until he was gasping for breath. Only returning to the mirror brought relief, his reflection calming him with its confident smile and clear eyes. He was 20 minutes late when he finally managed to tear himself away, the separation anxiety following him like a physical tether. Throughout the meeting, he found himself checking his appearance in any reflective surface. Windows, metallic coffee pots, the client's glass desk. Nothing satisfied the gnawing need to return home. He cut the meeting short despite the client's obvious interest, rushing back to his apartment in a cold sweat. The moment he stood before the mirror again, euphoria washed over him. Recognition and welcome emanating from the glass like radiation. That night, the whispers formed words he finally understood. Look how beautiful you've become. See how I've improved you. Others will envy what we're becoming. Malcolm stared at his reflection, unable to deny the changes. His face had shed years, lines smoothed, jaw tightened, gray hairs returning to youthful brown. His body appeared more toned, though he hadn't exercised. Even his posture had changed, more commanding, more assured. "What are you doing to me?" he whispered. His reflection's lips moved a fraction before his own, smile wider than muscle should allow. "Making you perfect, making you mine." The next morning, stepping from the shower, Malcolm noticed them. Thin red lines traced across his torso, abstract patterns that mimicked the carved figures on the mirror's frame. He touched them cautiously, feeling nothing. No pain, no raised tissue. Just designs appearing on his skin like scarlet frost on glass. He watched, transfixed, as they faded over minutes, disappearing entirely by the time he dried himself. He should have been terrified. Should have called a doctor or fled the apartment. Instead, he dressed carefully and went directly to the mirror, standing before it with an offering of his undivided attention. His reflection reached toward him from within the glass, fingers extending impossibly beyond the surface. Malcolm reached back without hesitation. Chapter 3: Awakening. The smell hit Dr. Sarah Chen before she even entered the apartment, copper and wrought with an underlying chemical tang she couldn't identify. She paused at the threshold, centering herself, as she had been trained to do before confronting the worst humanity had to offer. "You sure you're up for this, Doc?" Detective Ramirez looked skeptical, his broad face shiny with sweat, despite the unusual cold seeping from the apartment. Medical examiner said it's the worst he's seen in 20 years. "I've worked Ripper copycat cases in Chicago." Sarah adjusted her latex gloves. "I doubt this will be worse." She was wrong. The victim lay spread-eagled on the hardwood floor of an otherwise ordinary Upper East Side apartment, a middle-aged man, or what remained of him. His skin had been meticulously removed in one continuous piece, like peeling an orange without breaking the rind. The flayed skin had been arranged in a precise pattern on the wall opposite the body, a spiral of human parchment interwoven with symbols Sarah didn't recognize. Most disturbing was the victim's face. Despite being stripped of its covering, the exposed musculature was contorted in what could only be described as ecstasy, the bleeding rictus of a man experiencing pleasure at the moment of death. "Victor Crane, 53, investment banker," Ramirez read from his notebook, eyes fixed anywhere but on the corpse. "Cleaning lady found him this morning. Says she never heard him bring anyone home last night." Sarah circled the body carefully, noting the precision of the cutting. This wasn't done in anger. The removal was methodical, practiced. Your killer has either medical training or has done this before. Jesus. The arrangement is ritualistic. She gestured to the skin tapestry. These symbols have meaning to the perpetrator. Sarah approached the wall display, careful not to disturb evidence. As she studied the patterns, something shifted in her perception, a subtle distortion like heat rippling above asphalt. She'd experienced this before when her psychic sensitivity activated at crime scenes, though she kept this ability strictly to herself. The symbols seemed to pulse with faint luminescence. Behind them, like a shadow beneath water, she glimpsed a figure, a woman composed of reflective shards, emerging from what appeared to be an ornate mirror. The vision lasted only seconds, but left Sarah dizzy and tasting metal. "You okay, Doc?" Ramirez steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Fine, just—" She gestured vaguely. "The temperature in here is strange." Indeed, the apartment was unnaturally cold, their breath visible despite outdoor temperatures in the 70s. Most peculiar was how the cold seemed concentrated around a rectangular outline on the wall, where dust patterns suggested something large had recently hung. "There was a mirror here," she said, indicating the outline. Recently removed. Ramirez nodded. Crime scene photos show a blank wall, but there's a mirror hook. We're checking if anything was stolen. Sarah's gaze caught something unusual by the victim's hand. A glossy auction catalog. A sticky note marked a page featuring an ornate, silver-framed mirror. "I need this bagged for evidence," she said, pointing without touching it. 3 hours later, Sarah sat in the precinct's cramped conference room, staring at the auction catalog. The mirror that had triggered her vision was right there on page 37, an ornate Hungarian piece with an elaborate frame depicting intertwined figures in various states of ecstasy and suffering. "Got something interesting." Ramirez dropped a file on the table. Victim attended an auction at Harrington's 2 weeks ago, bid on several items, but lost a Hungarian mirror to another buyer. According to the auction house, he was pretty upset about it. Who bought it? Art dealer named Malcolm Reed, been trying to rebuild his reputation after some forgery scandal. Lives in the meatpacking district. Sarah tapped the catalog photo. This is the mirror that hung in Crane's apartment. He must have acquired one similar to what he lost at auction. Or the killer took it. Ramirez frowned. "We should talk to Reed, see if his purchase is still in his possession." Sarah nodded, already sensing connections forming. "I need to consult with someone first. A specialist in ritualistic crime patterns." Professor Emerson's office at Columbia University was a cluttered shrine to the macabre. Shelves overflowing with books on medieval torture, ritual murder, and occult practices. The man himself matched his surroundings, gray-bearded, disheveled, with keen eyes that had seen humanity's darkest impulses catalogued across centuries. The flaying follows Hungarian nobility punishment protocols from the 1600s, he said, examining the crime scene photos. But the arrangement is older. Pagan, pre-Christian Magyar ritual configurations. Sarah pointed to specific symbols in the skin arrangement. Any idea what these represent? This spiral pattern appears in Carpathian blood rituals, specifically those dedicated to entities that exist between worlds. Emerson leaned closer. The Countess Bathory was rumored to practice similar rites, though historical accounts focus more on her bathing in blood than her deeper occult interests. What about mirrors? Any significance in these rituals? Emerson's eyes sharpened with interest. There are references to specialized mirrors, created to open doorways or contain spirits. Bathory reportedly commissioned several from an alchemist in her employ, objects that could harvest and concentrate life essence. "Why do you ask?" Sarah chose her words carefully. The crime scene had indications of a recently removed mirror. The victim had been interested in acquiring a Hungarian mirror with possible Bathory connections. "Find that mirror, Dr. Chen." Emerson's voice had lost its academic detachment. "In certain traditions, mirrors aren't just reflective surfaces. They're thresholds, doorways that can be opened from either side under the right circumstances." Malcolm stood before the mirror, watching ripples distort his reflection, as though the surface had become liquid silver. When he touched it, his fingers met resistance, then sank slightly into the cool metallic surface, sending concentric circles outward. He should have been terrified, but the sensation was exhilarating, like breaking through a membrane into forbidden territory. His reflection smiled, the expression not quite synchronized with his actual face. It had been happening more frequently, subtle discrepancies between his movements and those of his reflection. Sometimes he'd catch it staring at him with hungry intensity while he worked at his desk, head turning to track him when he moved around the room. The doorbell interrupted his experiment. He withdrew his hand, the mirror's surface solidifying instantly. "They're early," he muttered, annoyed at the interruption of his communion with the mirror. He'd impulsively invited several former colleagues for dinner, an opportunity to showcase his improved appearance and renewed confidence. The invitations had been accepted with surprised enthusiasm. His social isolation after the Caravaggio scandal had been nearly complete. Malcolm opened the door to find James and Patricia Wilson, gallery owners who had once been his closest friends before disassociating themselves from his disgrace. "Malcolm," Patricia air-kissed his cheeks, then pulled back to stare. My God, you look incredible. James, doesn't Malcolm look amazing? James, always more reserved, nodded appreciatively. Whatever rejuvenation treatment you're using, I need the name of your doctor. Just clean living, Malcolm replied with a smile that felt too wide for his face. As he led them into the apartment, he felt an unusual awareness of their physical presence. The sound of blood pulsing through their veins, the subtle electromagnetic field surrounding their bodies, the molecular composition of their perfume and cologne. His senses had been growing increasingly acute over the past weeks, transforming ordinary perception into overwhelming sensory symphonies. 2 more couples arrived in quick succession, all former associates who had abandoned him after his professional collapse. Malcolm watched their expressions shift from polite reserve to genuine astonishment as they registered his transformation. His salt and pepper hair had returned to the rich brown of his 30s. The bags under his eyes had vanished. Even his posture had improved, projecting vitality and authority. The apartment looks different somehow, Patricia remarked as Malcolm poured wine. More vibrant. Because you're seeing it through my mirror, Malcolm thought, though he wasn't entirely sure what he meant. He had prepared an elaborate meal, Hungarian goulash with saffron rice, slavers selected to complement the heightened sensory perception he now experienced daily. His guests exclaimed over the intensity of the flavors, the richness of the wine, unaware they were participating in a communion of sorts. After dinner, Malcolm led them on a tour of his latest acquisitions, culminating in the study where the mirror dominated the eastern wall. Extraordinary piece. James approached it, wine glass in hand. Hungarian? 17th century, with possible Bathory provenance. Malcolm watched their reflections in the silver surface. Each appeared slightly diminished compared to his own vibrant image, colors duller, features less defined, as though the mirror found them unworthy of its full attention. Patricia shivered, though the room was comfortably warm. It's beautiful craftsmanship, but rather intense for a living space. I find it energizing, Malcolm replied. It's become a focal point for my research. As his guests clustered around the mirror, Malcolm noticed strange effects in their behavior. Patricia kept touching her throat as though having difficulty swallowing. James blinked rapidly, complaining about the room spinning. Others reported sudden headaches, visual distortions, or inexplicable anxiety. Only Malcolm remained comfortable in the mirror's presence, watching with detached interest as his guests made excuses to leave much earlier than expected. Something about the wine, Patricia murmured, leaning heavily on James as they departed. Terrible migraine coming on. Malcolm closed the door behind them, relieved to be alone again with his acquisition. He returned to the study, expecting to see his improved reflection waiting for him. Instead, the mirror's surface swirled with mist, gradually coalescing into the figure of a woman, beautiful, pale, with eyes like liquid mercury. Her lips moved, speaking words in Hungarian that echoed in Malcolm's mind with perfect clarity. "You fed them to me," she said, her voice like crystal chimes. "Their essence, their vitality. Delicious appetizers." Malcolm staggered back, momentarily frightened by this undeniable manifestation. His own reflection appeared beside her, mouth moving to form English words while hers continued in Hungarian, a perfect translation. "Don't be afraid," his reflection said. "You've known I was here all along. You've felt me improving you, reshaping you, preparing you." "Who are you?" Malcolm whispered. "I am Elizabeth," the woman replied through his reflection's mouth. "Once bound in silver and glass by those who feared my appetites. But you released me, Malcolm. You recognized what I offer. The enhanced senses, the improved appearance. Mere beginnings." His reflection smiled with too many teeth. "I have so much more to give you. Beauty that never fades. Pleasure beyond human limits. Life extended indefinitely." "What do you want in return?" Malcolm asked, already suspecting the answer. The silver surface rippled, showing images of his dinner guests, their life force visibly diminished, small tendrils of vitality extracted and flowing into the mirror. "Sustenance," Elizabeth replied simply. "Worship. partnership. Sarah sat surrounded by cold case files, a pattern emerging that chilled her more than the evidence itself. 3 unsolved murders spanning 5 decades, each victim flayed in the same meticulous manner, skin arranged in identical ritualistic patterns. Each had occurred shortly after the Hungarian mirror changed ownership. The earliest case, from 1972, described a victim found before a similar mirror, face frozen in apparent ecstasy, despite horrific mutilation. The case notes mentioned unexplainable cold at the scene, and investigators experiencing visual and auditory hallucinations while examining the evidence. Most disturbing were the witness statements from the 1994 case. Neighbors reporting hearing a woman's voice speaking in a foreign language from the victim's apartment, though he lived alone. The victim had purchased an antique mirror 3 weeks before his death. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Ramirez. Reed confirms mirror still in his possession. Invites us to see it tomorrow. Says he's been researching its history. A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the precinct's aggressive air conditioning. She gathered the files, noting one final connection. In each case, the previous owner of the mirror had died violently within a month of selling it. Malcolm woke with a strangled gasp, disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness. Something was wrong. His sheets were wet, his skin slick with blood. His hands, chest, and face were covered in drying blood. He scrambled from the bed, heart pounding. In the bathroom mirror, he looked like something from a slaughterhouse, crimson streaks drying to rust brown on his skin, matting his hair, speckling his lips and teeth. But he had no wounds, not a single cut. The blood wasn't his. With growing horror, Malcolm examined his fingernails, clean as though meticulously scrubbed. He checked his eyes, clear, no sign of ruptured vessels from strangulation or struggle. What happened? He whispered to his reflection, which only stared back impassively. Malcolm staggered to the study, drawn by instinct to the Hungarian mirror. Its surface swirled with mist as he approached, then cleared to show not his own reflection, but the interior of an unfamiliar apartment. Modern furniture, abstract art on the walls, a view of Central Park visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. In the center of this reflected room lay a dark shape on pale carpeting, a human-sized stain spreading outward like a bloody halo. As Malcolm watched, paralyzed with shock, a pale female figure entered the reflected apartment, moving with inhuman grace. Erzsébet turned toward him, her mercury eyes meeting his across impossible distance, lips curved in satisfaction. The tether is established. Her voice whispered directly into his mind. Blood calls to blood. What was separate now joins. The reflection rippled and vanished, leaving Malcolm staring at his own blood-covered image, unable to distinguish between reality and nightmare, victim and perpetrator, human and something else entirely. Chapter 4. Hunger. Sarah's phone jolted her awake at 4:38 a.m. Detective Ramirez's voice crackled with tension. "We've got another one. Same M.O." 30 minutes later, Sarah stepped into a penthouse overlooking Central Park, dread settling in her stomach like ice. The scene was a meticulous recreation of Victor Crane's murder. Flayed body on the floor, skin arranged in precise patterns on the wall, face frozen in ecstatic agony despite catastrophic mutilation. James Wilson. Gallery owner, Ramirez said, consulting his notebook. Wife's out of town. Cleaning service found him. Sarah circled the corpse. The removal technique was identical. One continuous piece of skin, expertly excised. The room temperature hovered just above freezing, despite the building's heating system running at full capacity. Most telling was the wall opposite the body, another dust outline where a mirror had recently hung. Check if he was at the Harrington auction, Sarah said. Already did. Ramirez handed her a file. Wilson attended with his wife. He bid on the Hungarian mirror, but lost to Malcolm Reed. They had dinner at Reed's apartment 2 nights ago. Sarah studied the blood patterns. Unlike ordinary arterial spray, The blood had been applied with almost artistic precision, forming symbols identical to those at Crane's apartment. Her psychic sensitivity buzzed at the edge of her consciousness, images threatening to break through. "I need to see Reed today," she said, "before this happens again." Malcolm hadn't left his apartment in 3 days. The mirror had become his world. He'd rearranged his furniture to create an altar-like space before it, sleeping on the floor rather than leaving its presence. His appearance had transformed dramatically, cheekbones sharper, eyes brighter, skin luminous with unnatural vitality. Yet his clothes hung on him, unwashed. Empty takeout containers littered the periphery of his shrine. He'd stopped shaving, though his beard grew in thick and lustrous rather than unkempt. Sleep and wakefulness had become indistinguishable as he lost himself for hours in the mirror's depths. Within its silver surface, he witnessed visions of Hungary centuries past, blood rituals performed in stone chambers, bodies opened like flowers to release their essence, ecstatic worshippers offering themselves to the Lady of Exquisite Pain. His research had progressed through fevered bursts of activity. The mirror's creator, Georgi Thurzo, had belonged to a cult that predated Christianity in the region. Worshippers of an entity they called Uva Gurnu, the Glass Lady. Their texts described her as a being who existed between worlds, accessing our reality through reflective surfaces. The Bathory connection had been a red herring. Elizabeth Bathory had merely been the most famous acolyte of a much older tradition. Her bloodbaths a crude attempt to replicate the rejuvenation the lady offered her true servants. Malcolm's phone rang, breaking his communion. Eliza's name flashed on the screen. He answered with irritation. "The police called," she said without preamble. "A Detective Ramirez and Dr. Chen want to see you this afternoon about a mirror you purchased at Harrington's." Malcolm glanced at his reflection, seeing it smile independently of his own expression. "Tell them 3 o'clock, he said. After hanging up, he approached the mirror, pressing his palm against its surface. The silver rippled like mercury beneath his touch, cool but yielding. His reflection spoke without his lips moving. "They suspect," it said, "but they cannot understand. Show them what you've become." Malcolm showered for the first time in days, watching the water bead on his transformed body. His musculature had refined itself, taking on the sculptural quality of Renaissance marble. The intricate patterns that occasionally appeared on his skin had become more frequent, now glowing faintly before fading. At precisely 3 o'clock, the intercom buzzed. Ramirez and Chen waited in the lobby. Malcolm buzzed them up, exchanging a knowing look with his reflection before answering the door. "Detective, doctor." He greeted them with unnatural composure. "Please come in." He watched their reaction as they entered. Ramirez's professional neutrality, Sarah's barely concealed shock at his appearance. He could smell their blood, hear their heartbeats accelerating with unconscious alarm. "We're investigating 2 homicides," Ramirez began, "with connections to an auction you attended." "How unfortunate." Malcolm gestured toward the living room. "How can I help?" Sarah remained standing. "Both victims bid against you for a Hungarian mirror. We'd like to see it." "Of course." Malcolm led them toward the study, feeling the mirror's anticipation like electricity in the air. "I've been researching its history." Fascinating piece. The mirror dominated the space, silver frame gleaming despite the muted afternoon light. Malcolm watched their reflections appear in its surface, Ramirez's dulled and indistinct, Sarah's surprisingly vibrant. "Both victims had similar mirrors," Sarah said, studying the ornate frame. "Both were killed within days of encountering you." Malcolm smiled, stepping behind them so all 3 faced the mirror. "Coincidence can appear meaningful when we're searching for patterns. The human mind craves order." He focused on Ramirez's reflection, channeling the techniques Erzsébet had taught him. The detective's image shimmered slightly, particles of light extracting from it like mist rising from water. Ramirez swayed, hand moving to his temple, bit lightheaded suddenly. Malcolm intensified his focus, drawing more essence through the mirror. Ramirez paled visibly, sweat beading on his forehead. "You should sit," Malcolm suggested, directing him to a chair outside the mirror's direct reflection. The feeding stopped, but Malcolm felt the stolen energy crackling beneath his skin, invigorating him. Sarah had noticed something, her eyes narrowing as she glanced between Malcolm and the detective. She approached the mirror cautiously, hand extended, but not touching the surface. "The frame depicts scenes from the Bathory legends," Malcolm explained, "though my research suggests the mirror predates her birth by nearly a century. The symbols carved here," Sarah pointed to specific figures. "They match exactly the arrangement of skin in both murder scenes. Folkloric symbols are often repeated across centuries." Malcolm watched her reflection, noting with interest that it resisted his attempts to extract energy. Something about her was different, protected somehow. "Who is the lady of exquisite pain?" she asked abruptly. Malcolm couldn't hide his surprise. "Where did you hear that name?" "The victims were arranged as offerings. I want to know to whom." Malcolm felt the mirror's surface warming behind him, Erzsébet's presence strengthening as Sarah's questions approached dangerous knowledge. "An obscure Hungarian deity," he replied carefully, "associated with transformation through suffering." The cult believed pain and pleasure were not opposites, but points on the same spectrum of transcendent experience. Sarah's eyes never left the mirror as he spoke. "Have you noticed anything unusual about it? Cold spots? Visual anomalies? Auditory phenomena?" "It's just a mirror, Dr. Chen," Malcolm smiled. "Though I admit it's had a transformative effect on my life. My research has never been more productive." Ramirez had recovered enough to join the conversation. "We'll need the provenance papers and any information about previous owners." "Of course." Malcolm retrieved a folder from his desk. "I've traced ownership back to 1943, when it was confiscated from a Jewish family in Budapest. Before that, the record is incomplete." As they prepared to leave, Sarah lingered before the mirror. "The frame shows signs of recent cleaning around these specific symbols." She pointed to characters that spelled out a name in ancient Magyar script. "Erzsébet." "Dust accumulates," Malcolm said dismissively. "I take good care of my acquisitions." After they left, Malcolm returned to the mirror, pressing both hands against its surface. The silver parted like water, allowing his fingers to sink wrist-deep into mercurial coldness. "They know nothing," Erzsébet's voice whispered from within. "But the woman has power. She sees beyond the veil." "She'll return," Malcolm agreed. "We should prepare." The following morning, Eliza arrived with documents Malcolm had requested weeks earlier, obscure texts on Hungarian folk practices and medieval metallurgy. She stopped short when she saw him, eyes widening. "Malcolm?" Her voice held uncertainty. "You look different." He smiled, noting how her gaze lingered on his transformed features. "I've been focused on my research. Come see what I've discovered." He led her to the study where the mirror waited, silver surface momentarily clouding, then clearing as they approached. Malcolm positioned Eliza before it, standing close behind her. "It's beautiful," she said, admiring the craftsmanship. "But something about it makes me uncomfortable." "Look deeper," Malcolm urged, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Past your reflection." He focused on her image in the mirror, applying the techniques he'd been practicing. Eliza's reflection shimmered, then began to transform, clothes melting away, skin glowing with unnatural radiance, face contorting in expressions of ecstasy no human could naturally experience. Eliza gasped, knees buckling. "What's happening?" Her voice emerged strained, caught between pleasure and fear. "I feel everything so intense." Malcolm intensified his focus, channeling energy through the mirror into her nervous system. Eliza moaned, head falling back against his shoulder, as pleasure overwhelmed her. Her reflection writhed in ecstatic agony, while her physical body trembled with sensations beyond normal human capacity. "Do you see her?" Malcolm whispered. "The lady?" Half-closed eyes, Eliza stared at the mirror, where Elizabeth's form had appeared behind her reflection. Pale and beautiful, mercury eyes gleaming with hunger. Yes, Eliza breathed. She's glorious. When Malcolm finally released her from the mirror's influence, Eliza collapsed in the nearest chair, pupils dilated, breathing ragged. She stared at him with newfound devotion. "What did you do to me?" she asked, voice filled with wonder rather than accusation. "Showed you a glimpse of what exists beyond human perception." Malcolm touched her cheek, feeling her lean into his hand with puppy-like eagerness. "Would you like to see more?" Eliza nodded, already addicted to the transcendent pleasure she'd experienced. "I'll do anything." "Good," Malcolm smiled. "I need your help with something." That evening, Malcolm carefully removed the mirror from the wall. With Eliza's assistance, he laid it face down on the floor, exposing the wooden backing with its intricate carved symbols. "Hold the light closer," he instructed. Under strong illumination, previously invisible text appeared between the carved circles, script written in a silvery substance that only revealed itself at certain angles. Malcolm photographed each section methodically while Eliza translated through an app on her phone. "It's some form of ancient Hungarian," she said, squinting at the screen. "The gateway opens through the sacrifice of essence. The lady feeds on ecstasy and agony freely given. Blood marks the path between worlds." Malcolm traced the central symbol with his fingertip. "This part is a ritual instruction. See how these lines form a map?" The carvings indeed created a diagram, concentric circles with paths connecting specific points, all centering on the figure of a woman composed of triangular shards. "It's a feeding ritual," Malcolm explained. "The mirror was created as a conduit between our world and hers, but it requires sustenance to maintain the connection." Eliza should have been horrified. Instead, still under the mirror's influence, she nodded with fascination. "How do we complete it?" Malcolm smiled at her eagerness. "All in good time. First, I need you to find someone for me, the man in this photo." He showed her a printout from the auction catalog, the underbidder for the mirror. "I believe he's still interested in acquiring it." Dr. Sarah Chen spread crime scene photos across Professor Emerson's cluttered desk. The symbols match exactly, both murder scenes and the mirror frame. "It can't be coincidence." The elderly professor adjusted his glasses, expression grave. "These are ritual configurations associated with the Uveg cult, glass worshippers, medieval Hungarian practitioners who believed in an entity that existed within reflective surfaces." "The Lady of Exquisite Pain," Sarah supplied. "You've done your homework." Emerson looked impressed. The cult believed she could grant extended life, enhanced sensory experience, even supernatural abilities, but required regular sacrifice to maintain her presence in our world. "Human sacrifice? Of a specific kind." Emerson pointed to particular symbols. "The victims had to experience simultaneous pleasure and pain at the moment of death, the perfect balance of sensations. The skin was removed as a vessel for the victim's essence, arranged to create a pathway between worlds." Sarah suppressed a shudder. "The cult is extinct?" "Officially eliminated during the Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Church was particularly thorough in Hungary." Emerson paused. "But certain artifacts survived. Ceremonial tools, instructional texts, and supposedly mirrors created to house aspects of the lady herself. How would such a mirror function?" Sarah tried to keep her tone academic, despite the chill creeping up her spine. "According to the texts, these mirrors didn't just reflect reality. They modified it, showed people what they desired most, then fed on that desire. The longer someone possessed the mirror, the more it possessed them, transforming them gradually into vessels or acolytes." Sarah thought of Malcolm Reed's changed appearance, the unnatural vitality radiating from him. "Could you identify someone affected by such an artifact?" The texts describe several signs: unusually acute senses, improved appearance despite neglectful behavior, an inability to maintain distance from the mirror, and eventually, physical anomalies like altered reflection or light-absorbing properties of the skin. And if someone were fully transformed? Emerson's expression darkened. They would become a harvester, collecting essence from victims to feed both themselves and the entity within the mirror. Eventually, they might even merge with it physically. Sarah pushed a photo across the desk, a close-up of Malcolm's face from their meeting. This man owns the mirror. This picture was taken yesterday. The professor studied it, then looked up with alarm. If these texts are accurate, he's already in the final stages of transformation. The symmetry of his features, the luminosity of his skin, these aren't natural improvements. He's becoming something else. Malcolm stood naked before the mirror, watching as his reflection rippled like quicksilver. His research had reached its culmination, the ritual instructions translated, the necessary components assembled, his body prepared through weeks of transformation. As he watched, his skin began to change, patches turning reflective like polished metal, then returning to normal flesh tones in rippling waves. The sensation was extraordinary, neither painful nor pleasurable, but transcendent, beyond human categorization. The mergence begins, Erzsébet's voice echoed from within the glass. Soon we will be one flesh, one essence, spanning both realms. Malcolm pressed his palms against the mirror's surface, feeling it yield beneath his touch. This time, instead of simply allowing his hands to sink into the silver, he pressed his entire body forward. The surface enveloped him like cool liquid, drawing him inward. For a moment, he existed in both places simultaneously, half in his apartment, half in the misty realm beyond the glass, where Erzsébet waited, her mercury eyes gleaming with triumph. His flesh transformed where mirror met skin, becoming reflective, light-absorbing, neither solid nor liquid, but something between states. He could feel Erzsébet's consciousness merging with his own, her centuries of existence flooding his mind with knowledge and hunger. Just as he was about to surrender completely to the transformation, his phone rang from the distant reality of his apartment. The sound broke his concentration, disrupting the mergence process. The mirror's surface solidified suddenly, forcing him back into full physicality with a painful wrench. Malcolm collapsed to the floor, gasping. His skin still rippled with silver patterns, internal organs momentarily visible beneath translucent flesh before returning to normal appearance. The phone continued ringing insistently. He crawled to it, answering with a voice that echoed strangely, as though speaking from the bottom of a well. "Malcolm? It's Eliza. I found him. The underbidder. He's very interested in seeing the mirror." Through the pain of his interrupted transformation, Malcolm smiled. The ritual required one more significant sacrifice, one perfect balance of pleasure and agony to complete his metamorphosis. "Bring him tomorrow night," he instructed, watching his reflection smile independently in the mirror. "Tell him I'm finally ready to sell." Chapter 5. Possession. Eliza's blood ran down the mirror in perfect rivulets, following paths invisible until liquid revealed them. Malcolm guided her hand, the ceremonial blade slicing her palm with surgical precision, as they stood before the mirror at midnight. "Don't heal it closed," he instructed, his voice layered with harmonic undertones that hadn't been present weeks ago. "The lady requires an open pathway." Eliza nodded. Pupils dilated with a cocktail of endorphins the mirror had triggered in her system. Since Malcolm had first exposed her to the mirror's influence, she'd become addicted to the transcendent sensations it produced, pleasure so intense it bordered on religious experience. "Press your hand against the surface," Malcolm whispered, his breath unnaturally cool against her ear. When Eliza's bloodied palm met the silver, the sensation defied description. The mirror's surface yielded slightly, cool mercury embracing her wound. Energy surged up her arm, igniting nerve endings throughout her body. Her back arched involuntarily, a moan escaping her lips as pleasure radiated from her core. "She's accepting you." Malcolm smiled, his teeth gleaming too white in the darkness. "You feel it, don't you? The connection forming?" Eliza could only nod, lost in sensation. Within the mirror, her reflection transformed, clothes dissolving, skin glowing with unnatural luminescence, eyes becoming pools of quicksilver. Behind her reflection, a woman's figure formed from the bloody traces, pale, beautiful, with eyes that held centuries of hunger. "Elizabeth," Eliza whispered the name Malcolm had taught her. "I offer myself willingly." The figure in the mirror smiled, mercury eyes flashing with approval. Eliza felt something shift inside her, as though her internal organs had rearranged themselves to create space for another presence. The pleasure intensified, pushing beyond human tolerance into a realm where ecstasy and agony became indistinguishable. Malcolm watched with detached fascination as Eliza convulsed before the mirror, her first willing sacrifice of essence, feeding both the lady and himself. The ritual was merely preparatory, a preliminary offering before the main event, scheduled for tomorrow night. But her willingness made the energy transfer particularly potent. "Enough for tonight," he said eventually, breaking the connection by removing Eliza's hand from the mirror. She collapsed against him, breathing heavily, skin flushed and damp. Words failed her. "Just the beginning," Malcolm promised, helping her to the couch, where she immediately fell into exhausted sleep. He returned to the mirror alone, watching his reflection ripple and transform. His humanity was receding daily. Food had become unnecessary. Sleep occurred only in brief intervals while seated before the silver surface. His skin had developed a subtle metallic sheen in certain light, as though mercury ran just beneath the surface. Soon, his reflection whispered without his lips moving, "The final sacrifice approaches." Sarah Chen spread a city map across the conference table, red pins marking murder locations. She'd added historical sites from Professor Emerson's research, places where similar ritualistic killings had occurred over the past century, each connected to the mirror's appearance. "Do you see it?" she asked Detective Ramirez, who studied the pattern with narrowed eyes. "Pentagram?" he guessed. "Close. It's a 5-pointed ritual configuration associated with the Uveg cult." Sarah connected the points, revealing a specific geometric arrangement. Each murder forms part of a ceremonial preparation. "For what?" "A manifestation ritual." Sarah indicated the center of the pattern, a point that corresponded exactly with Malcolm Reed's address. The mirror at the center acts as a doorway. These sacrifices are creating anchor points. Ramirez scratched his stubbled chin. "You're suggesting Reed is killing people as part of some occult ritual?" "I'm suggesting something is using Reed to complete a pattern started centuries ago." Sarah tacked the oldest murder location. "This killing in 1896 matches our current cases exactly, right down to the skin arrangements. Same with these cases in 1943 and 1972. That's impossible. Reed wouldn't have been born for most of those." "It's not about Reed. It's about the mirror." Sarah pushed Professor Emerson's translations across the table. "According to these texts, the entity requires 5 major sacrifices at specific locations, forming a geometric key that unlocks its ability to fully manifest in our world." Ramirez sighed heavily. "Chen, I respect your expertise, but this is veering into X-Files territory. 2 victims dead, bodies mutilated in ways that defy conventional forensic explanation. Temperature anomalies at both scenes, both connected to Reed and his mirror." Sarah leaned forward. "We need to question him again." "On what grounds? We have no physical evidence linking him to either crime scene." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Professor Emerson. "Found reference to final ritual. After geometric preparation complete, entity requires 1 more sacrifice, someone with direct blood connection to host. Check if Reed has family." "His ex-wife," Sarah said suddenly. "We need to find Vanessa Reed." Malcolm stared at the ancient journal he discovered within a hidden compartment in the mirror's frame. The text was handwritten in archaic Hungarian, but he found he could understand it perfectly, another gift from Erzsébet as their minds continued merging. The journal belonged to Georgi Thurzo, the mirror's creator, documenting the possession process with a clinical detachment. Day 27. Host exhibiting accelerated changes. Reflective properties now visible beneath skin when viewed in certain light. Appetite for conventional sustenance diminished. Hunger for essence increased proportionally. Host reports sensory perception beyond human parameters, able to detect heartbeats at 20 paces, discern chemical composition through smell alone. Malcolm touched his own face, feeling the subtle hardness beneath seemingly normal flesh. Thurzo had documented his transformation with remarkable accuracy. Day 43. Separation from the mirror causes host intense physical distress. Positioning bed before it alleviates symptoms. Dreams shared between host and entity. Memories transferring bidirectionally. Host increasingly exhibits entity's mannerisms and knowledge. He continued reading, fascinated by the parallels to his own experience. Day 61. Host's reflection now moves independently. Physical mergence attempted, but insufficient power accumulated. Entity explains necessity of 5 cardinal sacrifices, plus 1 blood-bound offering to complete manifestation ritual. Final entry. Tomorrow we complete the geometric preparation with the 5th sacrifice. Then comes the blood offering. My own daughter who shares my essence. The lady promises transcendence beyond mortality. After centuries trapped in reflection, she will walk the world again, through me, her perfect vessel. The journal ended abruptly. Historical records showed Thurzo had disappeared without trace after allegedly murdering his daughter in a fit of madness. Now Malcolm understood, Thurzo hadn't disappeared. He had transformed, becoming one with the entity he worshipped. Just as Malcolm himself was transforming. Mrs. Reed hasn't been seen in 3 days, the Mirez reported, reviewing his notes. Dorman says she entered the building Tuesday afternoon to collect final possessions from Reed's apartment. Security footage shows her entering but never leaving. Sarah felt cold dread settling in her stomach. We need to get into Reed's apartment, now. Still working on that warrant. The Mirez looked frustrated. Judge wants more than occult theories and a possibly missing woman who might just be avoiding her ex-husband. Sarah's phone rang. The medical examiner. Chen speaking. You better come see this. Dr. Patel's voice was uncharacteristically disturbed. We found something inside Wilson's body cavity. Something that doesn't belong there. In the morgue 30 minutes later, Sarah stared at the object. Dr. Patel had extracted from James Wilson's thoracic cavity a shard of silvered glass approximately 3 inches long embedded behind his heart. I nearly missed it, Patel explained. It doesn't appear on X-rays or scans. Only found it by direct visual inspection. May I? Sarah extended a gloved hand. The moment her fingers touched the shard, psychic impressions flooded her mind. A woman comprised of reflective fragments, feeding on Wilson's essence as he died in ecstasy and agony. The entity grew stronger with each swallow of life force, pieces of her fragmented body reassembling within the mirror's depths. Sarah gasped, dropping the shard. Check Crane's body. Looks for a similar object. Already did. Patel produced a second evidence bag containing an identical glass fragment. Same location, behind the heart. What are we dealing with, Dr. Chen? Something that's rebuilding itself. Piece by piece, victim by victim. Malcolm guided Eliza through the intermediate ritual, his hands steady, as he painted symbols on the mirror's surface using her freely given blood. His movements were precise, recreating patterns shown to him in dreams shared with Erzsébet. The portal requires essence freely given, he explained as Eliza watched with fascination. Your willingness creates a stronger connection than forced sacrifice. The blood symbols began to glow with internal light as he completed the final sigil, a complex arrangement representing the 5-pointed, geometric pattern now established across the city. The mirror's surface rippled, then parted like liquid silver, revealing glimpses of a realm beyond, a place of twisted architecture and reflective surfaces where nothing remains still. Beautiful, Eliza whispered, reaching toward the opening. Malcolm caught her hand. Not yet. The portal is forming. but remains unstable. We need the final sacrifice to make it permanent. Eliza nodded, eyes reflecting the portal's mercurial light. She had changed dramatically in the days since her first communion with the mirror. Her movements had become fluid, almost predatory. Her skin developed a subtle metallic sheen when viewed at certain angles. Most striking were her eyes, now containing secondary reflections like fractured mirrors, showing glimpses of places and times beyond her vision. "Will I become like you?" she asked, watching Malcolm's skin ripple with quicksilver patterns. "You'll become something new," he promised. "Neither human nor other, but a perfect fusion." In the bedroom beyond the study, sealed within a wardroom modified to become a holding cell, Vanessa Reed listened to their conversation with growing horror, pulling futilely against the restraints that bound her to a chair positioned before a smaller mirror that reflected her terrified face back at her while simultaneously transmitting her image to the larger mirror in Malcolm's study. Sarah bolted upright in bed, heart pounding. The dream had been so vivid, a beautiful woman with silver eyes reaching toward her, lips forming words in an ancient language Sarah somehow understood. "Join us, seer, you who can perceive beyond the veil." The woman's face had been captivating, perfect beyond human possibility. But as Sarah watched, the beauty transformed, skin splitting to reveal a grotesque creature beneath, composed of reflective shards and exposed muscle. The creature's mouth opened impossibly wide, rows of glass teeth gleaming as it lunged for her throat. Sarah fumbled for her phone, checking the time. 3:17 a.m., the exact time Malcolm Reed had mentioned experiencing phenomena related to the mirror. Her phone rang immediately, startling her further. Detective Ramirez's voice was tense with excitement. "We got the warrant. Tactical team is assembling now. Meet me at Reed's building in 30 minutes. Sarah dressed quickly, the dream entity's parting words echoing in her mind. "Too late, little seer. By dawn, I will wear your world like a new skin." Eliza studied her reflection, marveling at the changes. Her ordinary human appearance remained mostly intact, but shifted when she moved, revealing glimpses of something crystalline beneath her skin, something that caught and refracted light unnaturally. The bedroom door opened, and Malcolm entered with inhuman grace. His transformation had accelerated dramatically since the intermediate ritual. His skin now openly shifted between human appearance and metallic sheen, the transition rippling across his body like mercury flowing beneath glass. "It's time," he said, voice resonating with harmonic overtones. "The final sacrifice awaits." "Vanessa?" Eliza asked, already knowing the answer. Malcolm nodded. "Blood of my blood, the perfect offering to complete the ritual." In the mirror behind him, Erzabet appeared, no longer merely a reflection, but a presence gaining substance with each sacrifice. Her form flickered between beauty and horror, the lady's true nature increasingly visible as her power grew. "Will it hurt her?" Eliza asked, surprising herself with the question. Weeks ago, she would have been horrified by their plans. Now she merely felt curious detachment. Beyond imagining, Malcolm smiled, teeth gleaming like polished silver. But in her final moments, she'll experience pleasure beyond mortal comprehension. Her sacrifice will open the door permanently. He extended his hand. Now visibly inhuman, fingers too long, joints too fluid, skin reflecting the room's light like polished metal. "Are you ready to transcend, Eliza? To become something magnificent?" Eliza took his hand without hesitation, her own fingers beginning to transform at his touch. "I was born ready," she whispered, eyes filling with quicksilver light. Chapter 6. Reflection. The body hung suspended from the ceiling by silver wire, skin precisely flayed except for the face, which remained intact and oddly serene. Below, a polished steel plate reflected her inverted image, Vanessa Reed, recognizable despite the horror inflicted upon her. Blood had been collected in 7 crystal bowls, arranged in a heptagram pattern, each positioned at precise coordinates on the floor. Jesus Christ, Detective Ramirez whispered, crossing himself reflexively. Sarah stepped carefully between the bowls, studying the scene. The temperature in the abandoned warehouse hovered just above freezing, despite the summer heat outside. Vanessa's removed skin had been stretched across a wooden frame, positioned directly opposite her suspended body, forming a grotesque canvas painted with familiar symbols, identical to those from previous victims, but with additional elements Sarah hadn't seen before. The pattern's evolving, she murmured, photographing the new configurations. Dr. Chen, a crime scene technician, gestured toward the wall. You should see this. The warehouse's far wall was covered with hundreds of mirrors of various sizes, arranged in what initially appeared random, but, when viewed from where Vanessa hung, formed a perfect optical illusion, the collective reflections creating a massive face composed of fractured glass. A woman's face with mercury eyes. It's her, Sarah whispered, the lady of the glass. Ramirez joined her, brow furrowed. I've been doing this 20 years, never seen anything like this. Sarah pointed to marks on Vanessa's wrists. She was held captive before being brought here. And look at the precision cuts, identical to our previous victims. Read. We need that search warrant now, Sarah insisted. This is unmistakably connected to the other killings. Her phone buzzed with a text from Professor Emerson. Discovered critical pattern. 7 deadly sins. Each victim represents one sin. This is almost complete. Sarah showed Ramirez the message. We have a pattern. Crane represented pride, a man known for his arrogance. Wilson was envy. He coveted Reed's possessions. Vanessa represents lust. Their marriage was notoriously passionate and destructive. That's 3. You're saying there are 4 more coming? At least 2 more before the entity can fully manifest, Sarah confirmed. With Reed as the centerpiece, we need to move now. Malcolm stood naked before the mirror, studying his transformed body with detached fascination. His skin had developed glass-like sections, perfectly transparent patches revealing the pulsing organs beneath. His movements produced subtle crystalline sounds, as though his bones were transforming into something harder, more brittle. When he turned his head quickly, his reflection remained still for a fraction of a second before catching up, the delay between action and image growing more pronounced. The apartment had been transformed into a ritual space, walls covered with symbols painted in Vanessa's blood, smaller mirrors positioned at precise angles to create a complex system of reflections, converging on the Hungarian mirror at the center. The air shimmered with potential energy, reality growing thin around the focal point. Beautiful, Erzsébet whispered from within the glass, her form more substantial than ever. You've prepared everything perfectly. Malcolm smiled, the expression cracking the skin around his mouth to reveal silvery tissue beneath. Vanessa made an exquisite offering. The pattern of lust. 4 more, Erzsébet reminded him. Wrath, greed, gluttony, and sloth. Then the final sacrifice will complete my manifestation. Malcolm's phone chimed with a message from Eliza. Collector arrived early, waiting in lobby. Greed approaches, he told the entity, slipping into a silk robe that concealed the more obvious signs of his transformation. Right on schedule. As he moved toward the door, a thought surfaced through the fog of devotion that had clouded his mind for weeks. You mentioned only 4 remaining sacrifices. The 7 sins, minus the 3 we've completed. What about the 7th? In the mirror, Erzsébet's expression shifted subtly. The 7th is pride, Malcolm. Your pride. My pride was Crane, he corrected, brow furrowing. The first sacrifice. No, she said, mercury eyes gleaming. Crane was vanity. Your pride, your essence, will be the crowning glory, the vessel through which I fully enter this world. Malcolm felt a momentary chill that had nothing to do with his transformed physiology. You mean I'll host you? We'll share this form? Erzsébet's laughter echoed like breaking glass. Share? Oh, my beautiful fool. There is no sharing in possession, only consumption. Before Malcolm could respond, the doorbell rang. He glanced between the door and the mirror, conflict visible on his increasingly inhuman face. Don't keep our guest waiting, Erzsébet urged, her voice suddenly honey-sweet again. We can discuss details later. Sarah paced the precinct conference room while the warrant request processed through the system. On the table, crime scene photos from all 3 murders were arranged chronologically, the pattern unmistakable to anyone willing to see it. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Dr. Chen speaking. He's changing. The voice was female, distorted by interference that sounded like breaking glass. Not human anymore. Who is this? Sarah demanded, though she already suspected. Eliza, Malcolm's assistant. The voice faded in and out, words fracturing mid-sentence. Mirror showing truth now. 7 souls to feed her. Collector is next. Greed. Eliza, where are you? We can help. Too late for me. The words emerged between crystalline sounds, as though spoken through a mouth filling with shards. Malcolm doesn't understand. Final sacrifice is himself. Entity consumes host completely. Happened before. What do you mean happened before? Sarah grabbed a pen, scribbling notes frantically. Not first cycle. Happens every century. 7 sins feed her. Then host becomes vessel. Static overwhelmed the voice momentarily. I looked in mirror too long, becoming like him, but still remember enough to warn. Where is Reed now? Is he at the penthouse? Preparing for collector, greed sacrifice. Eliza's voice deteriorated further, words emerging between sounds like ice cracking. She lied to him, all of us. Used up and discarded. Only vessel matters. How do we stop this? Sarah pressed. Break the sequence. Destroy mirror before 7 sacrifice. The line hissed with increasing interference. But careful. Mirror protected. Reflects attacks back on attacker. The call cut off abruptly. Sarah immediately dialed Ramirez. We need tactical at Reed's building now, she said without preamble. He's about to kill again. Harold Mercer stood in Malcolm Reed's study, champagne flute in hand, eyes fixed covetously on the Hungarian mirror. A notorious collector of occult artifacts, he had offered double Malcolm's purchase price immediately after losing the auction. Extraordinary condition, he murmured, leaning closer to examine the frame. The Bathory provenance alone makes it priceless, but these symbols, far older than I realized. It's quite special, Malcolm agreed, keeping to the shadows where the increasingly obvious changes to his appearance would be less noticeable. It's transformed my understanding of Hungarian folk practices entirely. I must say you look remarkably well, Mercer commented, glancing at Malcolm. When we last met at the Guggenheim benefit, you seemed diminished, divorce taking its toll, I assumed. Malcolm smiled thinly. The mirror has been restorative. Indeed, Mercer sipped his champagne. My offer stands at 60,000. Given your financial difficulties, I assume that's still attractive. Actually, Malcolm moved closer, letting his robe fall open slightly to reveal the glass-like patches on his chest. I've been reconsidering whether money holds any value compared to transcendence. Mercer's eyes widened, fixed on the impossible transparency of Malcolm's torso. What in God's name? Not God's name, Malcolm corrected softly. Hers. In the mirror behind Mercer, Urshabet appeared, her beauty momentarily visible before shifting to reveal her true form, a creature of glass shards and exposed sinew. Mercer turned, champagne flute shattering as it hit the floor. What is this? He gasped, backing away. The fulfillment of greed, Malcolm explained, advancing with inhuman grace. You've spent your life acquiring objects of power without understanding their purpose. Now you'll serve one directly. Mercer lunged for the door, but Malcolm moved with impossible speed, cutting off his escape. His fingers elongated as he reached for the collector, tips hardening into translucent points that gleamed in the apartment's muted light. The ritual requires your willing participation, Malcolm explained calmly. Fortunately, willing has flexible interpretations. He placed one crystalline finger against Mercer's forehead. The mirror's surface rippled. Energy flowing from it threw Malcolm into the terrified collector. Mercer's expression shifted from fear to confusion, then to euphoric surrender as the mirror's influence overwhelmed his mind. "I see her," he whispered, eyes dilating. "She's magnificent." "Yes," Malcolm agreed, "and hungry." Sarah's credentials got her past the doorman, but the elevator to the penthouse wasn't responding to the call button. Tactical officers were still 10 minutes out, delayed by an overturned truck that seemed suspiciously timed. "Something's interfering," she told Ramirez over the phone. "I'm taking the stairs." As Sarah began climbing, a psychic surge hit her with unprecedented force. Her surroundings dissolved, replaced by a series of rapid visions. Prague, 1647. A woman in a elaborate dress stands before a silver-backed mirror. 7 bodies arranged around her in a perfect circle, their skins removed and formed into a cocoon-like structure in which she encases herself. Budapest, 1783. A nobleman slices his own face with a shard of mirror, laughing as his features transform into reflective surfaces, his dinner guests serving as unwitting sacrifices. Berlin, 1942. An SS officer completes a ritual in a hidden bunker, mirrors arranged to create an optical illusion of infinite regression, blood flowing through channels carved into the concrete floor. Each vision showed the same entity, always female, always beautiful initially, before revealing her true form, using different hosts across centuries to complete the same ritual pattern. 7 sacrifices representing the 7 deadly sins, culminating in the host's own consumption as the entity took complete possession. The visions cleared as Sarah reached the penthouse level, leaving her gasping against the wall. The door to Reed's apartment stood partially open, a trail of crimson droplets leading inside. Drawing her sidearm, Sarah entered cautiously. The walls of the once elegant apartment were covered in blood symbols that seemed to move in her peripheral vision. Mirrors of various sizes had been positioned throughout, creating a dizzying array of reflections that made it difficult to determine what was real and what was illusory. A sound like breaking crystal drew her toward the study. She paused at the threshold, taking in the horrific tableau. Malcolm Reed stood before the Hungarian mirror, his form barely recognizable as human. His skin had transformed into a patchwork of flesh and glass, internal organs visible through transparent sections. Harold Mercer knelt before him in a state of reverent ecstasy, wrists sliced precisely to direct blood flow into a crystal bowl. "NYPD, don't move," Sarah shouted, weapon raised. Malcolm turned with fluid grace, movements producing delicate tinkling sounds. His face was a nightmare of transformation. Right side still recognizably human. Left side, a shattered mosaic of reflective fragments. Voice resonating with harmonic undertones. "You're just in time to witness transcendence." In the mirror behind him, Sarah saw not Malcolm's reflection, but the entity, Elizabeth, in her dual form, beautiful woman, merging with monstrous creature of glass and exposed muscle. "You're being deceived, Reed." Sarah kept her weapon trained on him, despite knowing bullets might be useless against his transformed physiology. "The entity isn't merging with you. It's consuming you. You're not becoming a god. You're becoming lunch." Malcolm's expression faltered. "She promised transformation, ascension beyond mortality." "She promises that to every host, every century," Sarah countered, recalling her visions. "Once the ritual is complete, once you sacrifice yourself, your consciousness is erased. You become nothing but a vessel, a puppet for her to wear, until she discards you for the next cycle." Behind Malcolm, the mirror surface began to ripple violently, Elizabeth's expression contorting with rage. "She lies," the entity hissed, voice like shattering glass. "Complete the ritual, my love. Bring the greed vessel to me." Malcolm hesitated, looking between Sarah and the mirror. For a moment, humanity flickered in his increasingly inhuman eyes. "If what she says is true," he addressed the entity, "then why didn't you tell me I was to be the final sacrifice?" Elizabeth's beautiful facade slipped further, revealing the horror beneath. "Because humans are weak, selfish creatures. You wouldn't have served me, knowing the price. But the rewards are lies, Sarah interrupted. Ask her about the others. George Thurzo, Victor Kaminsky, Hans Stryker. All hosts who thought they were becoming gods. Malcolm's face registered shock. How do you know those names? Because part of each host remains trapped in the mirror, Sarah explained, taking a careful step forward. Eliza told me. She's caught between worlds now, becoming like you, but she remembered enough to warn me. Malcolm turned back to the mirror, expression hardening.
Is this true? Am I just another temporary vessel to you?
The entity abandoned pretense, her true form fully emerging. A creature of reflective shards and exposed sinew, mercury eyes gleaming with ancient hunger. You are nothing, she roared, voice shattering two smaller mirrors nearby. A momentary vessel, a single breath in my eternal existence. Malcolm's rage erupted with unexpected violence. He grabbed a nearby chair and swung it toward the mirror with all his transformed strength. No, Sarah shouted, remembering Eliza's warning. The chair never reached the mirror's surface. Instead, it reversed direction mid-swing, striking Malcolm with his own force multiplied. His partially crystalline body shattered at the point of impact, glass-like shards exploding outward as he screamed in agony. The mirror reflects all attacks back on the attacker, Sarah explained, lowering her weapon. You can't destroy it directly. Malcolm collapsed to his knees, body trying to remake itself, jagged edges flowing like mercury to reconnect. Then how do we stop her? By breaking the sequence, Sarah said. The ritual requires 7 sins in specific order. Interrupt that, and the gateway remains sealed. The entity's rage manifested physically, the mirror's surface boiling with mercury-like activity. The temperature in the room plummeting until their breath clouded before them. Objects began to levitate. Books, pens, shards of broken glass, swirling in a vortex of paranormal energy. You cannot stop what was set in motion centuries ago, Erzabet roared. I will wear your world like a new skin. Malcolm struggled to his feet, his partially reformed body moving awkwardly. Get out, he told Sarah. I created this connection. I can sever it. You can't face her alone, Sarah insisted. I have people coming who understand what we're dealing with. Too late. Malcolm gestured to Mercer, who continued bleeding into the bowl, eyes glazed with ecstatic surrender. The 4th sacrifice is nearly complete. After that, only 3 remain before she can fully manifest. The building shuddered, plaster cracking along the ceiling as the entity's power grew. In the mirror, Erzabet seemed to push against the barrier between worlds, the surface bulging outward like a membrane about to rupture. My team will be here any minute, Sarah said, backing toward the door as flying objects increased in velocity around them. There isn't time, Malcolm replied, his voice steadying with resolve. But I think I understand now. The ritual requires willing sacrifices representing the 7 sins. If one sacrifice rejects the process, he turned to Sarah, his partially reflective face showing more humanity than it had in weeks. Find Professor Emerson. Tell him to bring the Carpathian text, the original binding ritual. It might be the only way to contain her once I disrupt the pattern. What are you going to do? Malcolm smiled, a terrible expression on his transformed face. I'm going to reject my role in her pattern. Pride goeth before destruction, after all. Before Sarah could respond, the penthouse door burst open as tactical officers finally arrived. The sudden intrusion seemed to strengthen the entity's manifestation, the mirror's surface rupturing partially, a crystalline hand emerging into the physical world. Go, Malcolm shouted, as objects flew more violently around the room. Bring Emerson and the binding text. It's our only chance. Sarah backed toward the tactical team, watching as Malcolm turned to face the partially manifesting entity. His body had reformed itself, but differently, less human than before, more a reflection of Erzabet's true nature. As she was pulled from the apartment by officers, Sarah saw Malcolm reach toward the emerging crystalline hand, their fingers touching in a perversion of Michelangelo's creation of Adam. Where they connected, reality itself seemed to fracture, cracks spreading through the air like breaks in invisible glass. The last thing she heard before the apartment door slammed shut was Malcolm's voice, strangely peaceful amid the chaos. Pride rejects you, the vessel denies its purpose. Then came the sound of reality shattering like a mirror struck by lightning. Chapter 7. Fracture. The abandoned cathedral's basement had been transformed into a ritual chamber. 2 victims hung suspended before antique mirrors, a fashion model who had once rejected Malcolm for a competing photographer, and a critic whose scathing review had contributed to his professional downfall. Envy and pride, the final components in the pattern. Their terrified eyes followed Malcolm as he moved between them with inhuman grace, his body now more glass than flesh. Where human skin remained, it had developed a reflective sheen like polished silver. His internal organs were clearly visible beneath transparent sections of his torso. Heart beating with unnatural slowness, lungs expanding with mercury-like fluid instead of air. "Please," the critic whimpered, straining against his bonds. "Whatever you want. Money, a retraction, anything." Malcolm tilted his head, the movement producing a sound like crystal chimes. "I want nothing from you, except your essence." His voice resonated with harmonic undertones, as though multiple voices spoke simultaneously. "Your sacrifice completes a pattern begun centuries ago." He approached the first mirror, pressing his palm against its surface. The glass rippled like water, energy flowing from it into Malcolm's transformed body. Behind him, Eliza entered the chamber, her transformation less advanced, but unmistakable. Skin developing reflective patches, eyes containing secondary reflections like fractured mirrors. "The police raided the penthouse," she reported, voice distorted by the crystalline structures forming in her throat. "They found the ritual space, but not us." "The lady anticipated this," Malcolm replied, though uncertainty flickered across his increasingly inhuman features. "The final phase must occur at a nexus point, where sacred geometry intersects with the city's architecture." He gestured around the cathedral basement. "This site sits directly above catacombs that predate the city itself, the perfect amplifier for the ritual's completion." Eliza approached cautiously, studying Malcolm's transformed appearance. "You're changing faster now. The lady's essence flows more freely as the pattern nears completion." Malcolm examined his reflective hand, watching light fracture through his fingertips. "Soon we'll be one entity, spanning both realms." But doubt had taken root since his confrontation with Dr. Chen. The entity had admitted he was merely a temporary vessel, a tool to be used and discarded. Yet the transformation continued, his humanity receding with each passing hour. "Prepare the final sacrifices," he instructed Eliza. "The ritual must be completed by midnight." As she moved to obey, Malcolm caught his fractured reflection in one of the ritual mirrors. For a moment, he saw not his transformed self, but the entity's true form, a monstrous creature of glass shards and exposed muscle, wearing his face like an ill-fitting mask. Sarah Chen led the tactical team through Malcolm Reed's penthouse, now transformed into an elaborate ritual space. Mirrors of various sizes covered every surface, positioned to create corridors of infinite reflection. Blood symbols adorned the walls, ceiling, and floor, intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "Careful," she warned the officers. "Don't look directly into the mirrors for too long." The Hungarian mirror dominated the eastern wall, its silver surface rippling like mercury, despite the absence of any breeze. As Sarah approached, the temperature plummeted dramatically, her breath clouding before her. "Dr. Chen," Professor Emerson called from the doorway, clutching an ancient leather-bound volume. "The binding text you requested." Sarah gestured him forward while keeping her distance from the primary mirror. "What can you tell me about this configuration?" Emerson surveyed the ritual space with academic detachment masking obvious horror. "It's a manifestation circuit, designed to thin the barrier between worlds. These symbols create a pathway for the entity to physically enter our reality. Can we disrupt it?" "Possibly." Emerson opened the text, revealing pages of faded script and disturbing illustrations. The original binding ritual trapped the entity in reflective surfaces centuries ago. It might be possible to reinforce that binding, but he broke off as the Hungarian mirror's surface suddenly bulged outward, a female hand composed of reflective shards emerging into the physical world. The hand was followed by an arm, then a shoulder, as the entity pushed against the weakened barrier between dimensions. "Everyone back," Sarah shouted, as the temperature dropped further, frost forming instantly on every surface. The tactical team retreated, weapons raised uselessly against a threat they couldn't comprehend. Only Sarah and Emerson remained, watching in horrified fascination as Erzsébet partially manifested, her upper body emerging from the mirror, while her lower half remained within the reflective surface. She was both beautiful and monstrous, a woman composed of reflective fragments arranged over exposed muscle and sinew. Her eyes were pools of liquid mercury, her mouth filled with teeth of sharpened glass. Where she touched the physical world, reality itself seemed to fracture, cracks spreading through the air like breaks in invisible glass. "Where is my vessel?" Her voice shattered two smaller mirrors, glass raining down on the hardwood floor. "Where is the one who bears my mark?" "Malcolm Reed isn't here," Sarah replied, struggling to maintain composure as her psychic sensitivity overwhelmed her with impressions of the entity's true nature, an ancient being that existed in the space between dimensions, feeding on extremes of human sensation. Erzsébet's mercury eyes fixed on Sarah, recognition flaring. "The seer, you who perceive beyond the veil." Her mouth curved in a terrible smile. "Your blood would make an exquisite binding." "The cathedral," Emerson whispered urgently to Sarah. "The symbols on the wall, they indicate St. Agnes Cathedral. It's built on a geometric power point." Sarah nodded almost imperceptibly, keeping her attention on the entity. "Your ritual is failing," she told Erzsébet. "We've disrupted the pattern." The entity's laughter sent cracks racing across every remaining mirror in the apartment. "The pattern was established centuries before your birth, little seer. My vessel completes it even now." With a sound like reality tearing, Erzsébet withdrew back into the mirror, her form rippling as the surface resealed behind her. But her presence didn't vanish. Instead, it multiplied, her image appearing simultaneously in every reflective surface in the apartment.
"She can manifest through any mirror," Emerson explained, backing toward the door. "We need to get to the cathedral before the final sacrifices are completed." Malcolm stood at the center of the ritual circle, body trembling as the final transformation overtook him, his remaining human flesh converted to living mirror, skin becoming reflective, bones transmuting to crystal, blood turning to quicksilver that flowed through transparent veins. The process should have been agonizing, but he experienced only a strange detachment as his humanity slipped away. His consciousness, fractured between what remained of Malcolm Reed and the growing presence of Erzsébet within him, two minds sharing increasingly limited space. "You resist still," her voice echoed within his mind. "Surrender and transcendence will be yours." "Transcendence or obliteration," he replied aloud, voice producing crystalline echoes in the cathedral basement. "You never intended to share this vessel." The entity's rage flowed through him like liquid fire. "Ungrateful creature, I elevated you beyond your pathetic human limitations, to serve as your temporary shell." Malcolm approached the first victim, the model whose rejection had once wounded his pride. "But what happens after you discard me? Where do I go?" Images flooded his mind, previous hosts trapped within the mirror's depths, their consciousness preserved but fragmented, experiencing eternal torment as the entity fed on their suffering. Malcolm staggered back, horror momentarily overwhelming the entity's control. This was his fate, eternal imprisonment within reflective limbo, watching helplessly as Erzsébet used his transformed body to wreak havoc in the physical world. "No," he whispered, fighting for control of his increasingly alien form. Eliza approached, concern visible on her partially transformed face. "Malcolm, what's wrong?" "She lied," he gasped,
internal struggle visible as patches of his body shifted between transparency and opacity. We're not becoming transcendent beings. We're becoming prisoners. Eliza's expression hardened. You're confused. The lady promised. The lady lies. Malcolm seized her shoulders, his crystalline fingers cracking her reflective skin. Look into my eyes, Eliza. See what I've become. Not a god, but a cage for something monstrous. For a moment, clarity returned to Eliza's fractured gaze. She saw the truth in Malcolm's transformed eyes. The horror of his fate, the entity's deception, the terrible price of their vanity. What can we do? She whispered. Before Malcolm could respond, pain exploded through his body as Elizabeth reasserted control. He collapsed to his knees, transparent chest revealing his heart crystallizing from within, each beat producing sounds like breaking glass. Complete the ritual, he gasped, voice no longer entirely his own. Feed her. Sarah led a combined force of tactical officers and specialists through the cathedral's main entrance, Professor Emerson close behind with the binding text. They had minutes at most before the ritual reached completion. The basement access should be near the altar, Emerson directed, consulting a diagram in the ancient book. As they moved through the cathedral's nave, every reflective surface came alive with Elizabeth's presence. Stained glass, polished marble, even the brass fixtures reflecting her monstrous form. The tactical team's flashlight beams created new reflective opportunities with each sweep, the entity seemingly everywhere at once. Don't look directly at any reflections, Sarah warned, and stay together. They found the basement entrance behind the altar, a heavy wooden door secured with modern locks that yielded quickly to the tactical team's equipment. As they descended the narrow stone stairs, temperature dropped precipitously, frost forming on the walls. Sarah's psychic sensitivity intensified with each step, overwhelming her with impressions of the ritual in progress. She could feel the entity's hunger, the victim's terror, the weakening barrier between dimensions. They burst into the basement chamber to find a scene from medieval nightmares. The two victims hung suspended before antique mirrors, blood flowing from precise incisions into ceremonial bowls. Malcolm stood at the center of a complex pattern inscribed on the floor, his transformed body barely recognizable as human, a living mirror with internal organs visible beneath a reflective surface. Eliza stood nearby, her transformation less complete but advancing rapidly, skin developing a patchwork of reflective sections. NYPD, don't move. The tactical commander's voice echoed through the chamber. Malcolm turned with inhuman grace, his movements producing sounds like crystal wind chimes. His face was a nightmare of transformation, features still recognizable but composed entirely of reflective material that showed not his own image but glimpses of Elizabeth's true form. Too late, he said, voice layered with the entity's harmonics. The pattern nears completion. Sarah stepped forward, the binding text clutched in one hand. Malcolm, if you're still in there, we know the truth. The entity isn't merging with you, it's consuming you. Something flickered across Malcolm's reflective features. A momentary reassertion of humanity. I know, he replied, voice briefly his own. She showed me what happens to her vessels. Help us stop her, Sarah urged. The binding ritual can trap her again. Malcolm struggled visibly, body shifting between states as he fought for control. Can't hold her back much longer, his voice fractured between his own and the entity's. She's strongest during feeding, weakest between sacrifices. The tactical team moved to free the suspended victims, but Malcolm's transformed body moved with impossible speed, intercepting them. His arms elongated into blade-like appendages, reflective edges gleaming in the chamber's dim light. You will not interrupt the pattern. Elizabeth's voice emerged from Malcolm's mouth, the sound shattering several small mirrors around the chamber. Sarah opened the binding text, frantically searching for the ritual instructions while the tactical team engaged Malcolm's transformed body. Their bullets passed harmlessly through his crystalline form, emerging from the other side to embed in the stone walls. The binding requires blood from someone with psychic sensitivity, Emerson explained hurriedly, pointing to specific passages in the text. It must be freely given while reciting these words. Sarah nodded grimly. I'll do it. Just tell me when. Across the chamber, Eliza watched the confrontation with growing clarity. The entity's control had weakened as it focused on Malcolm, allowing her partially human consciousness to resurface. She saw the truth of their situation with terrible clarity, the deception, the horror that awaited them, the innocent lives at stake. Making her decision, she moved toward Malcolm with determined grace. My lady, she called, voice still beautiful, despite the crystalline distortion. Take me instead. My transformation is incomplete. I can still serve as a vessel. Malcolm Ursabet turned, mercury eyes gleaming with interest. You offer yourself willingly? Completely, Eliza confirmed, approaching with arms outstretched. My essence is yours. As the entity's attention fixed on Eliza, Malcolm's consciousness resurged momentarily. Now, he gasped to Sarah. She's distracted, between feedings. Do it now. Sarah sliced her palm with a ritual knife Emerson provided, letting blood drip onto the pages of the binding text as she began reciting the ancient words. The chamber's temperature plummeted further, frost spreading across every surface, as reality itself seemed to thin around them. Eliza reached Malcolm, pressing her partially transformed body against his fully crystalline form. Where they touched, energy arced between them, Ursabet attempting to transfer her essence from Malcolm's failing vessel to Eliza's more viable form. I reject you, Eliza whispered as they connected, her momentary deception revealed. I deny you passage. The entity's rage manifested as physical force, a shock wave of energy that knocked the tactical team off their feet and shattered every mirror in the chamber, except the two ritual mirrors before the suspended victims. Malcolm's body began to fracture, cracks spreading across his crystalline surface as Ursabet fought to maintain control. Eliza held tight despite her own body beginning to shatter, buying precious seconds for Sarah to complete the binding ritual. Blood of the seer binds you, Sarah recited, pressing her bleeding palm against the text's central symbol. Between worlds you shall remain, neither here nor there, bound to reflection but denied substance. The chamber filled with unearthly light as the binding took effect. Malcolm and Eliza's shattered forms began to dissolve into reflective fragments, drawn inexorably toward the two remaining mirrors. The entity fought with terrifying force, reality itself buckling around them as dimensions intersected. The binding isn't strong enough, Emerson shouted over the cacophony of breaking glass and dimensional distortion. She's too powerful after consuming so much essence. Sarah understood what needed to be done. Moving with desperate determination, she approached the dissolving forms of Malcolm and Eliza, now more energy than matter, as Ursabet fought to maintain her connection to physical reality.
My blood creates not just binding but connection, Sarah declared, pressing her still bleeding palm directly into the swirling mass of reflective fragments. I bind you to me, Ursabet. Where I go, you follow. What I permit, you may do. What I forbid, you cannot attempt. The entity's scream transcended sound, manifesting as pure psychic agony that dropped everyone in the chamber to their knees. Sarah alone remained standing, her psychic sensitivity allowing her to withstand the assault as she completed the binding. Return to your prison, she commanded, directing the swirling energy toward one of the ritual mirrors. Bound by my blood, leashed to my will. The mirror's surface rippled, then parted like liquid silver as the entity was drawn inexorably back into confinement. Malcolm and Eliza's fragmented forms followed, their consciousness preserved but transformed, neither fully human nor fully absorbed. As the last reflective shard disappeared into the mirror, its surface solidified, trapping the entity once more. But something had changed. Where before the mirror had shown only reflection, now it displayed Ursabet in her dual form, beautiful and monstrous simultaneously, mercury eyes fixed on Sarah with eternal hatred. Sarah collapsed,
blood loss and psychic exhaustion overwhelming her. The last thing she saw before consciousness faded was her own reflection in the mirror, eyes momentarily flashing silver before returning to normal. The binding was complete, but at terrible cost. She was now permanently connected to the entity, jailer and prisoner linked for as long as Sarah lived. And in the depths of the mirror, Ersabet smiled, patient as only an immortal being can be. Chapter 8. Containment. The cathedral basement resembled the aftermath of a bomb detonation, though no conventional explosive could have caused such damage. Every reflective surface had shattered, except the ritual mirror containing the entity. Malcolm Reed's transformed body had crystallized completely before disintegrating into fine, glass-like powder that glittered under the emergency lights. Sarah Chen sat on the steps leading to the cathedral proper, a thermal blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the summer heat. Her hand throbbed where the ritual knife had sliced her palm, a wound that refused to close properly, the edges gleaming with an unnatural silvery sheen. "How are the victims?" she asked as Detective Ramirez approached. "Alive, physically intact." He looked troubled. "Mentally, that's another story. They keep talking about seeing themselves from inside the mirror. Doctors are sedating them for now." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. "And Eliza?" "No sign of her, just some reflective residue near where she was standing." Ramirez hesitated. "What exactly happened here, Chen?" Before she could answer, a team in unmarked black tactical gear entered the basement, led by a severe-looking woman in a charcoal suit. They moved with practiced efficiency, establishing a perimeter around the ritual mirror and photographing the symbols on the floor. "Dr. Chen," the woman extended a hand that Sarah didn't take. "Amanda Reese, Department of Unconventional Threats. We'll be taking over from here." "The mirror can't be moved carelessly," Sarah warned. "The binding is complicated." "We're well aware." Reese's expression remained neutral. "Your involvement has been noted at the highest levels. We'll need you to come with us for debriefing." Sarah glanced at her reflection in a puddle of water nearby. For a moment, just a moment, her reflection smiled independently, eyes flashing silver before returning to normal. "I don't think I have much choice," she replied. The facility beneath an unmarked government building in Virginia had clearly been prepared in advance. Sarah watched through one-way glass as technicians constructed a specialized vault around the ritual mirror, its walls inscribed with containment symbols from multiple traditions, Kabbalistic sigils alongside Vedic mandalas, Egyptian hieroglyphs intersecting with Native American pictographs. "Impressive," she commented to Professor Emerson, who had also been brought to the facility. "How long has your department known about these entities?" "Longer than I've been involved," he admitted. "The first documented governmental response was in 1943, after an incident in Berlin. But there are records suggesting unofficial awareness dating back to the early 1800s. Sarah touched her bandaged palm, feeling the wound pulse in synchronization with the subtle energy emanating from the mirror. "They're not telling me everything." "Few ever know everything in this field, Dr. Chen." Emerson looked tired, the events in the cathedral having aged him visibly. "But I suspect they know less than they think about your particular situation." Sarah had noticed the changes immediately after the binding ritual. Her already substantial psychic sensitivity had amplified dramatically. She could perceive emotions from people several rooms away, sense the history of objects by touching them, even glimpse fragments of possible futures in her peripheral vision. More disturbing were the effects on reflective surfaces around her. Mirrors, windows, even polished metal occasionally rippled when she passed, her reflection sometimes moving with subtle independence or showing glimpses of Ersabet's form superimposed over her own.
Dr. Chen, Amanda Reese entered the observation room. "Our specialists have some questions about the binding ritual you performed." Sarah turned from the window. "I imagine they do." "You deviated from the traditional binding described in the text," Reese noted, consulting a tablet.
Instead of simply containing the entity, you created what our experts are calling a tethered imprisonment, linking yourself directly to Erzsébet as both jailer and key. It was necessary, Sarah replied simply. The conventional binding wasn't strong enough. But you must understand the implications. Reese's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing genuine concern. Your life force now maintains the binding. Your death could potentially release the entity, regardless of physical containment measures. Sarah had already reached the same conclusion. The connection worked both ways. She could sense Erzsébet's presence constantly, a cold pressure at the edge of her consciousness. The entity was contained but aware, patient as only an immortal being could be. I'm aware of the risks, she said. What matters is understanding the cycle and breaking it permanently. 3 months later, Sarah stood in a specialized training room at the facility, now officially assigned to the Department of Unconventional Threats as a consultant. Around her, a dozen recruits watched attentively as she demonstrated techniques for recognizing signs of reflective entity influence. The initial indicators are subtle, she explained, gesturing to a series of photographs. Unusual cold spots near mirrors, reflections that seem delayed by milliseconds, subjects reporting enhanced sensory experiences after prolonged exposure to specific reflective objects. She moved to the next slide. Crime scene photos from cases spanning decades, each showing ritual configurations identical to those used by Malcolm Reed. The entity we contained is not unique. Historical records indicate similar manifestation attempts approximately every 70 years, though smaller incursions occur more frequently. Previous containments have always been temporary, the binding weakening as those connected to it died. A recruit raised her hand. If the binding is dependent on a single person, isn't that a critical vulnerability? Yes, Sarah acknowledged. Which is why we're developing alternative approaches. She didn't mention the personal cost of her connection to Erzsébet, the nightmares where she experienced the entity's centuries of imprisonment, the moments when reflective surfaces around her became temporary portals, glimpses of the realm beyond, visible for heartbeats before normalcy returned. The silver sheen that occasionally appeared in her eyes when she was tired or stressed. After the session, Reese approached with a file folder. We found something you should see. Inside was a photograph of an elderly Hungarian woman in a nursing home, Magda Kovacs, age 97. She was involved in a similar binding ritual in Budapest in 1943, the last surviving participant. Sarah studied the photo, noting the woman's clouded eyes and the silver scars on her palms, identical to the wound that had never properly healed on Sarah's own hand. She's dying, Reese continued, but she's asking to speak with you specifically. Says she recognizes a fellow jailer. The nursing home outside Budapest was small but immaculate, specializing in patients with unusual conditions. Magda Kovacs occupied a private room with no mirrors or reflective surfaces of any kind. Even the windows were treated with a special film that prevented reflection. The old woman's eyes fixed on Sarah the moment she entered, though medical records indicated she was legally blind. You carry her mark, Magda said in heavily accented English. I can see it shimmering around you like a silver web.
Sarah took a seat beside the bed. You participated in a binding ritual.
Not participated, I performed it. Magda's gnarled hand reached for Sarah's, fingers finding the silvery scar with unerring accuracy. Just as you did. We are sisters in burden, though separated by time. The entity we contained, Erzsébet, is merely one name she has worn, Magda interrupted. One face of many. In my time, she called herself Tükör Asszony, the Mirror Woman. Before that, other names in other lands. Sarah leaned closer. The binding I performed links your life force to her imprisonment. Magda nodded. As mine has done these many decades, but I am failing now. My binding weakens daily as death approaches. That's why I'm here, Sarah realized. Your binding is dissolving, but mine has replaced it. Yes, the cycle continues. Magda's blind eyes seemed to look through Sarah rather than at her. But it need not be eternal. There is a way to break it permanently. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. How? The entity you know as Erzsébet is not a singular being, but part of a family. Interdimensional creatures that feed on human sensation. The mirror is merely one gateway among many scattered throughout the world. Magda's breathing became labored, her ancient body struggling to convey crucial information before time ran out. To end the cycle, all gateways must be sealed simultaneously. A coordinated binding using blood from those with the sight. How many gateways? Sarah asked. 7. Always 7. Magda squeezed Sarah's hand with surprising strength. I found 3 in my lifetime. My records, hidden in the basement of St. Matthias Church in Buda. The cipher key is... She whispered a sequence of Hungarian words. The entities communicate across dimensions, Magda continued urgently. They know you now, as they have known me. They will test your binding, probe for weaknesses. When I die, my gateway will become active again, despite your binding of Erzsébet. Where is your gateway? Sarah asked. Magda smiled thinly. Beneath this very building. Why do you think I chose to die here? The foundations contain a binding circle that has held for decades. A nurse entered, frowning at Magda's elevated vital signs. She needs rest. 1 moment more, Magda insisted. Listen carefully, Sister Jailer. The entities cannot create their own doorways. They require human assistance. Someone must construct the gateway, perform the ritual, create the connection. Always look for the human element. As Sarah stood to leave, Magda caught her wrist with surprising strength. One last thing. The connection goes both ways. You can access her knowledge, her memories, her power, but each time you do, the barrier between you thins. I understand, Sarah said. No, you don't. Magda's blind eyes suddenly gleamed with silver light. But you will. Back at the containment facility, Sarah stood before the vault housing the ritual mirror. Through the specialized glass, she could see Erzsébet's form within the reflective surface, sometimes appearing as the beautiful woman who had seduced Malcolm Reed, other times revealing her true nature as a creature of glass shards and exposed sinew. She's been more active since your trip to Budapest, Amanda Reese observed, reviewing the monitoring data. The energy readings from the mirror have increased by 17%.
She knows about Magda, Sarah explained. The entities communicate across dimensions somehow. What exactly did Kovac tell you? Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about the other gateways. The department was efficient, but operated on a need-to-know basis that often excluded crucial context. Until she understood the full scope of what they were facing, partial disclosure seemed wisest. She confirmed that my binding replaced hers as she weakens, and that the entity has been contained multiple times throughout history, always temporarily. It wasn't a lie, merely an omission. Sarah needed time to verify Magda's claims about multiple gateways before potentially triggering a bureaucratic response that might complicate matters. There's something else, Reese said, handing Sarah a tablet. We've been analyzing your blood samples. The cellular changes are concerning. The medical report detailed subtle but accelerating alterations to Sarah's DNA, changes that corresponded to the silvery scar on her palm. Her cells were developing reflective properties at the microscopic level, gradually transforming in ways that defied conventional biology. Am I becoming like Malcolm? She asked, remembering his horrific transformation. No, Reese assured her. The process is different. More like your body is adapting to channel and contain the energy from the binding. But it's putting tremendous strain on your system. Sarah had felt the changes. Moments of extraordinary perception, alternating with debilitating migraines, her reflection occasionally showing a woman she barely recognized, with eyes that gleamed silver in certain light. How long? She asked simply. At the current progression rate. 5 years, maybe less, before the cellular changes reach critical mass.
Reese's professional demeanor softened slightly. We're working on interventions, but we need to understand the mechanism better. Sarah turned back to the mirror, meeting Elizabeth's mercury gaze through the specialized glass. The entity smiled, a terrible expression on her beautiful/monstrous face. 5 years, her voice whispered directly into Sarah's mind. A mere heartbeat to one such as I. I can wait, little jailer. That night, Sarah dreamed of Malcolm Reed's victims, experiencing their final moments through the psychic connection established by the binding ritual. She felt their terror and ecstasy as the entity fed on their essence, understood the ritual's purpose beyond mere sustenance. Each sacrifice had strengthened the dimensional gateway, thinning reality around the mirror to facilitate Elizabeth's emergence. But there was something more, a pattern within the pattern, a purpose beyond manifestation. Sarah woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat that gleamed silver in the moonlight filtering through her window. The dream knowledge remained, clarifying what Magda had tried to explain. The entities weren't simply feeding on humanity. They were preparing for something larger. Each manifestation cycle advanced their collective goal: the creation of a permanent gateway between dimensions that would allow their entire family to cross over simultaneously. Sarah reached for her phone to call Reese, then hesitated as her reflection in the screen moved independently, smiling with Elizabeth's terrible beauty. You begin to understand, little jailer, the entity whispered in her mind. But understanding brings its own dangers.
Sarah's hand trembled as she set down the phone. The connection was growing stronger, despite the containment measures. She needed to act quickly before the knowledge came at too high a price. The next morning, she requested access to the department's historical archives, specifically the records from 1943 Berlin. If Magda was right about multiple gateways, there would be evidence in the documentation of previous containment efforts. What she found confirmed her worst fears. The Berlin incident had involved not one but two reflective entities. Elizabeth's counterpart had been contained by Allied forces after a Nazi occult division attempted to weaponize its abilities. The containment had required 5 psychically sensitive individuals, 3 of whom died during the ritual. More disturbing were references to similar containments in Cairo, 1872, Shanghai 1907, and Rio de Janeiro 1978, each involving entities with different names but identical methodologies, each bound by individuals who subsequently developed abilities similar to Sarah's own. The pattern was unmistakable once viewed comprehensively. 7 gateways, 7 entities, all working toward a common goal across centuries. As Sarah compiled her findings, her reflection in the computer screen rippled, Elizabeth's form briefly superimposing over her own. 7 keys, 7 doors, the entity whispered. Break one binding, and the pattern weakens. Break all, and we are free. Sarah closed the file, decision made. She would need to find Magda's records in Budapest, locate the other gateways, and assemble a team capable of performing a synchronized binding ritual. The alternative was unthinkable: 7 entities like Elizabeth, free to manifest physically in the world. But first, she needed to understand exactly what she had become through the binding. Not just jailer, but something new, something that existed in the borderlands between human and other, capable of perceiving and potentially manipulating the barriers between dimensions. She returned to the containment vault that evening when the facility was minimally staffed. Standing before the specialized glass, she placed her scarred palm against the surface, feeling the familiar cold pressure of Elizabeth's presence. "Show me," she commanded, exerting the will that maintained the binding. "Show me what you are, what I'm becoming, what we face." Within the mirror, Elizabeth smiled, beautiful and terrible simultaneously. The surface rippled beneath Sarah's palm, and knowledge flooded her consciousness in a torrent of images and sensations. 7 entities, 7 gateways, scattered across the world but connected through dimensions humans couldn't perceive. A family of ancient beings that had influenced humanity's development for millennia, nurturing the capacity for extreme sensation that sustained them. And beyond them, something larger, a presence that even the entities feared, waiting beyond the final gateway that all 7 doorways would combine to create if their cycle completed.
Sarah pulled her hand away, gasping as the connection broke. Her reflection in the specialized glass showed eyes now completely silver, skin developing the subtle reflective sheen she had observed in Malcolm and Eliza. The binding wasn't just containing Erzabet, it was transforming Sarah into something that could perceive and potentially navigate the spaces between dimensions. A human anchor for an interdimensional prison, evolving to fulfill her function more effectively. As she turned to leave, Sarah caught movement in her peripheral vision, her reflection remaining still for a fraction of a second too long before matching her movement. The boundary between jailer and prisoner was thinning, just as Magda had warned. 5 years suddenly seemed optimistic. She needed to find the other gateways and those connected to them. Time was running out, not just for her, but for the unwitting human anchors maintaining the other 6 bindings across the world. Somewhere in Budapest, hidden beneath St. Matthias Church, Magda Kovacs had left the next piece of the puzzle. Sarah would find it, and then she would begin assembling the team needed to end the cycle permanently. But as she left the containment area, she couldn't shake the feeling that Erzabet had shown her exactly what the entity wanted her to see. Knowledge offered as both truth and manipulation, a gambit in a game spanning centuries. In every reflective surface she passed, Sarah's silver eyes stared back at her, filled with questions about which parts of her remained fully human, and which had already transformed into something else entirely.